Okay, so my name is Bogdan Ștefănescu. I'll be chairing this next section of our conference. We have 3 papers. We're already running late. So I will directly invite Raul, to start talking about his subject.
Thank you. I'm going to sit here because I need to move through some slides. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful event. I find it a really interesting conference. And just a short comment before I begin. I'm not going to present my paper as such. Oh, we have... It doesn't work. It's me.
It doesn't work?
One second. It doesn't have one. Watching on time sequence. Anyway, so I'm not going to present my paper because it'll be way too long for 15 minutes, but I'm going to speak around the paper, if that makes any sense. And I'm going to try to connect my paper, which deals with the interwar period, with the contemporary new nationalisms. And
Sorry, so now you should say yes, and then it should work, I hope.
yes. I should say yes here. Okay, yes then. Good. Back from the, what was I saying? Sorry. So, instead of presenting my paper, I'm going to speak around it and argue why the subject I'm studying, i.e. the revolutionary movement in Romania, Romania's interwar fascist movement, is still relevant today for Romania, for centuries, and more generally for the world. The picture I decided to have on my first slide is from the United Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia this year, which, as you know, ended in tragedy with the car ramming into protesters against the rally and killing 1 person and injuring 19 others. This is a picture of one of the organizers of the rally, Matthew Heimbach, appearing in court the day after the attack, wearing a t-shirt that some of you might recognize the face there, is of Romania's interwar fascist leader, Corneliu Codreanu. And of course the Romanian press jumped at this one. How is this guy wearing a Codreanu t-shirt? I was aware of Matthew Heimbach's existence for quite some time, and I was aware of the importance of Codreanu for the post-war new right in both Europe and the US. In fact, in 2015, he gave an extensive interview in which he explained why he's attracted to Romanian fascism. He actually used his legionary sympathies to argue that he's not a racist, because the legionary movement was never racist. It placed emphasis on religion. Actually, Heimbach has converted to Orthodoxy. His wife and him traveled to Romania and got married in an Orthodox church. They are in very good terms with the priests who themselves are supporting the neo-fascist groups in Romania, or are part of the neo-fascist groups in Romania. And this is a very interesting case of a fascist movement in Eastern Europe becoming a source of inspiration for Western European post-war, Western European and US post-war radical right. Okay. So, for those who don't recognize the face on the t-shirt, this is the Corneliu Codreanu, the leader of Romanian interwar fascist movement. Now, the premises of this presentation. On the one hand, you have a conspicuous absence of any kind of far-right, right-wing populist, ultranationalist, whatever you want to call it, political organization in contemporary Romania. This is what we hear this conference is how omnipresent it is in Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe. Well, Romania doesn't have one. They haven't been in parliament for the last 3 parliamentary elections, and they virtually disappeared in the mid-2000s in terms of political representation. That being said, this is also particularly conspicuous on the one hand because you have a strong legacy of interwar fascism, as well as attempts at its recuperation in post-communist Romania. And also we had an initial resurgence of the radical right immediately after 1989 in the first decade, which at the time scholars were describing as being worse and more pronounced than anywhere else in Central and Eastern Europe. So the first decade from 1990 to roughly 2000 witnessed the resurgence of the radical right in Romania. Now it's disappeared, and my question is why? And also if this is really the case. Now, to some extent, my presentation also seeks to answer the question of my colleague yesterday, who presented also post-president from Romania. Why is Romania so different in the communist bloc in terms of the pattern of nationalism? And I argue that the importance of Romania's anti-war fascist movement accounts for this difference during communism, in post-communist times, and of course in the interwar period itself. And this is going to be the gist of my presentation. In doing so, I'm also going to do something that has been touched upon in various presentations but not really addressed. What does this talk of fascism mean when referring to new nationalisms? Is the concept misplaced? Does the concept have certain validity when we talk about the contemporary radical right? Or is it more or less one of these lay adaptations, this kind of the insult that fascism has become rather than an ethical term? Now, three things I'm going to address. First, there's this talk of radical continuity and radical return. It's developed by Michael Shafir. It doesn't have a year there because all of his publications speak about radical continuity and radical return. It's the conceptual framework Michael Shafir developed for dealing with the post-communist Romanian radical right. And his main argument is that there are two strands. The radical continuity one is the one that continues the nationalism of the communist regime, so the so-called national communism of Ceausescu's regime. The other one, the radical return, would be the one that goes back to the pre-communist period and tries to rehabilitate interwar fascism. My argument here is that we need to go beyond this dichotomy because it was interwar fascism itself that informed the national communism of Ceausescu. So the dichotomy is pretty much a false one. The other thing, when we talk about fascism, one of the definitions that has become famous in shaping the so-called new consensus in studying fascism is Roger Griffin's definition of fascism, as I quote, a genus of political ideology whose mythic core in its various permutations is a polygenetic form of populist ultranationalism. Polygenetic indicating, in a fancier wording, just a tendency towards renewal or rebirth present within fascist movement, this notion of a new beginning. Thing is, ever since Griffin published his definition in 1993, everybody's been focusing on polygenetic. Whether or not renewal and rebirth is a precondition of fascist movements has become the main debate. And ultranationalism is taken for granted. I mean, nobody's going to argue that fascist movements were not ultranationalist. But populism has been ignored. And I think this has been a significant problem because discussions of populism today disregard discussions of populism in the interwar period and even before the 20th century. The emergence of populism in the 19th century as a left-wing movement in Russia, for example, the Tsarist Empire, is completely ignored by the literature on populism today. And I think working through this legacy is quite important. Finally, my own view of nationalism, because I've heard a lot about nationalism as a singular concept. I'd rather speak of nationalisms in any given context, except for the early 19th century ones, when there was one elite promoting the nationalist project. In most modern contexts, you would have a number of nationalist players proposing a number of nationalist projects, and these are competing with each other. As an example, in the interwar period, almost all the Romanian parties contained the word national in the name. We had the National Liberals, the National Peasant Party, we had the National Christian Party, which was the racist anti-Semitic competitor of the legionary movement. And then strikingly, we have the fascist movement, which is the only one that doesn't have the word national. Their names are the Legion of the Archangel Michael and the Iron Guard, respectively. But all the other parties were putting forward nationalist projects. Now my question is, and my argument is, first of all, that the fascists won this contest. My question is why? And the question of why has a lot to do with these patterns of exclusion and inclusion, which are relevant for new nationalisms as well. And here, as a first question I would have, and this was mentioned in the previous talk as well, what is the relationship of the contemporary radical right to its pre-45 predecessor? Are they acting as a source of inspiration for the new nationalism in Central and Eastern Europe? Or, if they're not acting as sources of inspiration, can we identify common patterns? Things that were similar in the first crisis of liberalism, first major crisis of liberalism in the interwar period, and the one we're experiencing now after 2008. The second question relates to modes of exclusion. We've heard a lot about how the other is important for reinforcing group boundaries, and I'm not going to argue with that, I of course agree, but the question is how different others are salient at different times. Because it's not always, the type of groups that act as others for an in-group are different. We've heard talk of Islam, we've heard talk of refugees, of migrants, we've heard talk of Jews, we've heard talk I mean, we haven't heard talk about the Roma, which is quite interesting since in Central and Eastern Europe. Well, there was one presentation, Hans, that mentioned the Roma tree, which is a very important trope today, but wasn't an important trope in the interwar period. I recently presented a paper comparing anti-Semitism and anti-Ziganism in Romania. I don't like the term anti-Ziganism, but this was German, so anti-Ziganism existed. What can you do? And the conclusion of that was that anti-Semitism was important in the interwar period for a state that was heavily dependent on foreign capital and that displaced this dependence on foreign capital on Jews, who were of course the owners of that foreign capital, even though they weren't. And respectively that the anti-Roma prejudice that you encounter in post-communist Romania is indicative of a neoliberal state that hates and the socially assisted, if you want, the people dependent on benefits, and for whom the Roma stands as an epitome. In the interwar period, the Roma was not an issue in Romania, because racism was not an issue in Romania. The exclusion was based on religion, and since Roma are of the same religion as the majority, they were not identified as a separate group. They were seen as poor ethnic Romanians, if you want. They were not counted as a special ethnic category. And they were, therefore, by all these nationalist projects, included rather than excluded. The other thing that has to be asked is the importance of inclusion. Of course, because we don't like it and because it's the most disturbing thing about the radical right, we tend to focus on exclusion. But these parties don't begin their appeal to the population by saying, so we hate this group and we hate this group and we hate this group. They have a positive message, and that positive message is one of inclusion. Who is in rather than who is out. The who is out comes after they define who is in, and this positive message is usually ignored, but populism is heavily dependent on being inclusive. And all the populist projects, to some extent in the interwar period, I'm referring to the interwar period here, were inclusive. The legionary, what my paper, which I'm not going to present, argues is that one of the reasons why the legionary movement won this contest of nationalisms in interwar Romania was because of their populism and because of the fact they paid attention to groups that other traditional parties would not pay attention to, specifically peasants and workers. Huge constituencies, especially peasants in a country that was 74% of the population worked in agriculture, but they were mostly ignored by the traditional political parties. Workers as well were ignored by the mainstream parties and did not have a communist party to turn to because the communist party was minute. Returning to the question, why is Romanian national communism different from other examples in Eastern Europe? Well, because we didn't have a communist party. Its membership was less than 2,000 in 1944. They were mostly ethnic minorities, so it was easy to sort of easy to claim in the period it was anti-national. And the reason for this is, it's not that we never had communism, it's that the Romanians had something inbuilt against communism. They just, in the early 20s, the party made the mistake of following Comintern orders and arguing for the return of the province of West Arabia back to the Soviet Union. Now, in a country that had just reunified and that celebrated union as the biggest achievement of the Romanian state, saying should we give back a part of the territory was shooting yourself in the foot. So is that they became irrelevant. By 44, there were 2,000 people. And that explains a lot why the other extreme developed so much as well. And finally, the question of the disappearance or mainstreaming of the fascist legacy. Now, the absence of any radical right-wing populist or ultra-nationalist organization in the Romanian parliament today, even outside parliament, I mean the extremely small parties, would say this no longer matters. The story of what happened in the world no longer matters. However, in 2015, there was a law on Holocaust denial proposed. We had a law on Holocaust denial in 2006. But in 2015, it was meant to be modified to make it clear that the legionary movement is a fascist movement. The reaction against this was from the mainstream of Romanian society. It wasn't fringe parties that opposed this notion. It was the Romanian Academy signing a collective letter, signed principally by the head of the Romanian Academy, saying the legionary movement is not a fascist movement. This goes against all the literature published in Romania and abroad about the legionary movement, which is undoubtedly a fascist movement. But the Romanian Academy made it clear that it wasn't. Romanian public intellectuals, left and right, spoke out against this, saying it's an attack on Romanian national heritage, on the Romanian intellectuals who are supporters of the movement and so on. And that it it's also basically not true. The legionary movement was not a fascist movement. Now, going through the slides and going to my conclusion, few things that are worth noting. First, as fascists, the members of the legionary movement were the main victims of repression during communism, as well as the main people constituting with the resistance. Which means in the post-89 environment, they were rehabilitated as martyrs of communism, some of them as so-called prison saints. I'm more than happy to speak about any of this or about the paper in the Q&A. My colleague yesterday was also mentioning the nationalism of Romanian dissidents and exiles. The exile was primarily made up of fascist sympathizers. The foreign names you were mentioning yesterday, I was noting that Eliade Cioran, Norica Vulcanescu, all of them were sympathizers of the legionary movement, and actually this is another peculiarity of the Romanian case, that the Heidegger situation in Germany is repeated at the level of almost all inter-war intellectuals. There are very few who are not sympathizers or members. And therefore, and this is an argument I haven't developed yet, but it's the plan for my next publication, Ceausescu's national communism was not a left-wing nationalism, was not a communist nationalism, but it was a nationalism with fascist undertones. And because the communist regime persecuted the members of the legionary movement, the assumption is they really had nothing to do with the legionary movement. My argument is, no, they persecuted the people, but adopted the ideological tenets and ethos. An example of this being, in 1965, Ceausescu's plan for industrializing the country is based on a 1930 book by Mihail Ionescu called Corporatism, which was inspired by Italian corporatism and by Ionescu's close friendship with Mussolini. This was the blueprint for Romanian industrialization in the 60s. And the Communist Party knew very well who the author is and had absolutely no ideological problem whatsoever to take a fascist text and make it economic reality. Sorry. So, what's new about new nationalisms? There was a lot of talk yesterday about civicness and civil society as being opposed to the new nationalisms. There's an interesting book by Dylan Riley from about 2010 where he speaks about the civic foundations of nationalism. And simply put, he says that fascist movements were democratic movements, and their attack on liberalism was a result of their being democratic. I would make the same argument about the new nationalisms today. They're not anti-democratic movements, they're anti-liberal movements. They are democratic in their appeal to the people. And that appeal might be or might not be genuine. This is another comment I would have about demagogy. A lot of people dismiss demagogy because, well, populist politicians lie. No, all politicians lie. Populist politicians are one type of politicians who lie. So dismissing demagogy is problematic because that demagogy constitutes, as Laclau argued, the anatomy of the ecological world. Rhetoric constitutes populist subjects. So dismissing demagogy as lies is counterproductive, especially in a world of post-truth. That's it. Okay. And to conclude with the last thing, the relationship between populism and democracy. As Margaret Kahneman acknowledged, there's a double dimension to democracy. There's an institutional one and the redemptive aspect. The institutional one, of course, is the day-to-day function of democracy. The redemptive aspect of democracy is its promise to emancipate virtually everyone. And her argument was that this darker side of it's not necessarily darker, it's also more direct and more spontaneous, more related to the people, prevails when the institutional framework seems to have failed. And that was thank you. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. My mind is struggling to catch up with what you were saying about half of the way through your presentation. Pretty soon I'll get to the end of it. Let's go to the next presentation because we've already taken a couple of minutes from that. Diego Han will still be talking about fascism, right?
Yeah. Actually, it's similar. I found a lot of similarities with the Romanian case. Okay, so, well, good morning, so good day, everyone, once again. I'm Diego. I really want to thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this seminar. As I said, my topic is really similar to the one of my colleague before me. What I wanted to do, what I mean by contemporary Christian nationalism, I mean actually two periods. And I mean the first period is the period of the war in the 90s and how this, let's say, Ustasha, symbolism of the independent state of Croatia that existed in the Civil War back, and how it developed actually the second period is the period after Croatia entered in the European Union. So it's going to be actually some kind of analysis of the political discourse and how this change developed and so on in those years. Okay, so just a brief history, I'll be really brief with that. Why is the history of the independent state of Croatia controversial in Croatia? Because it was actually a civil war. You had Croatians fighting on one side, the Ustaša side, you had Croatians fighting in the other side, the anti-fascist parties and communist as you wish to call them. Because of the concentration camps, because if you didn't know, actually Croatia had the only, it's not something to be proud of, but the only concentration camps that were not controlled by Germans, but were directly controlled by the Ustaša and the Croatians. And of course this is very controversial in Croatia, and because of the Catholic Church, because of course the Catholic Church had a really also controversial role during the Second World War. Croatia is statistically really religious, and so it's not that easy to talk about the relationship between the church and everything that happened in this territory in the Second World War. Of course, independent state of Croatia was not an independent state, it was a puppet state of the Axis, but it was led by Ante Pavelić, his Ustaša movement that developed in Italy, under Mussolini, and so on. So we come to the first period that I said. Okay, just few pictures to show you something about the Nezavisna država Hrvatska, the territory pretty much. Here you see the Archbishop of Zagreb Pavelić, so the church and the Ustaša. Here you see the coat of arms, and this is interesting because if you pay attention in the left corner you see the first white square. This is actually the official coat of arms of the independent state of Croatia. The Croatian official coat of arms today starts with the red one. So if you see the white one, you know we're talking about Ustaša. If you see the red one, we're talking about Croatia, which is also really interesting. And of course the Croatian official coat of arms does not have a big U over it. And the last picture, well, it's Pavelić with his ally, so just to be clear what we're talking about. So the first period, it started actually before the war with Franjo Tuđman, of course, the first Croatian president. With his book, I tried to translate the name of the book. I don't know if there's a translation. It doesn't sound very, I don't know, good to me, but it doesn't matter. The problems with his book, and he was a historian by the way, are his view on what happened during the Second World War in the territory of the independent state of Croatia. Especially his view in Jasenovac, he lowered the number, for example, of people, of deaths actually in the camps from 700,000, that was a hoax from the communist regime, to 30,000. Today we know that the actual number were around 70,000 to 80,000. So he lowered the number, this was controversial even at the time. He tried to change the role of the Ustaša in the war. He said that they were maybe not, it was not only their fault, it was a complicated situation and so on. And of course he chose to somehow change the view on the victims. For example, he said that maybe the Jews had some privileges in the concentration camps and so on. You can imagine what kind of result this view actually had on him and on his book and so on. And also, in the first year of his presidency, we had the devastation of more than 3,000 monuments dedicated to anti-fascism, to the People Liberation Army, and so on. And the Ustaša symbolism came back in the state how the official currency became the kuna, as it was during the period of the independent state of Croatia. The parliament had the same name as it had in the independent state of Croatia. But this is, let's say, the political aspect of this return of the Ustaša symbolism. There is another aspect that developed through the army, actually, and especially by the POS, the Croatian Defense Forces. They were actually not part of the official military at the beginning. They were created in Bosnia and Herzegovina and were created by the Croatian Rights Party. They were openly Ustaša. They were declaring themselves to be the descendants of the Ustaša. They were wearing the Ustaša uniforms. They had the same symbols. Even their battalions, as you can see here, the 9th Battalion after Vitis Boban had the name from an Ustaša commander. They were really proud. They were led by this guy here. You don't see that very well, but you see the symbols of the Ustaša, the coat of arms on his arm and on the hat and so on. If you wonder how he looks today, and it's interesting because he's really active in Croatia, that's how he looks today. They said that a picture says more than 1,000 words, so you can imagine what is the ideology of this guy. Now I have a video, but I'm not sure if it will play here. I don't know Polish, should it be Nationalisms? No, it shouldn't. I would like to open this video, but I don't know how to do it here. Could somebody help me? Да? I mean, it's a nice video to understand this battalion and how this works, but if not, anyways. Okay. dedicated to the struggle of Croatia to enter the European Union and so on. Just before we entered the European Union, we had the election in 2011 when the center-left won the election. It was the harshest defeat for the center-right that actually did Croatia almost since the war. The new leader became Tomislav Karamarko, and he switched the political agenda on the right from some Europeism to focus on patriotism. He called it patriotism, but actually was really nationalistic point of view. And on the real exaltation of the patriotic war of the branitelji. And the branitelji actually are the veterans of the war in the 90s. In Croatia we don't call them veterans, we call them defenders. So it says a lot about what picture does Croatia want to show to the world about the war and so on. What's the problem with the branitelji, their role? They started a protest just, I think, 2 years after the center-left came to power. They lasted for 555 days. They demanded a bit of everything. Actually, it was not a protest that wanted something. It was a political protest that was backed by the right. The problem with them is that they started to use this as a symbolism again. For example, during a march against the closure of a TV channel known for radical materials, they were saluting with the Zadon, which was the actual official salute of the Independence Day of Croatia. It means like for home ready. And pretty much nobody in the government said anything about it. And the government was centralized, which is interesting. They became actually the emblems of the real Croats. Of course, they were abused by the Reds in power and so on. And just to show you a picture why they were connected to the center-right, you can see the current Croatian president, Kitarović and Tomislav Karamarko in their tent, just showing their support for what they are protesting for and so on. And now, this was the starting point for the second period. Then I tried to analyze how this symbolism actually developed in the society. In order to do so, I analyzed three, let's say, aspects: the commemorations, the culture, and the sport and entertainment. The commemoration, actually, I somehow compared two commemorations: the commemoration of Jasenovac. It is usually held on the 22nd of April. It commemorates the escape of 600 detainees or whatever from the Jasenovac camp. 500 were killed, barely 100 survived, and so on. Since last year, we had three commemorations. Why we had three commemorations? Because during the war in the 90s, some members of the force, the defense forces that I told you before, were killed near Jasenovac. So what did the government do? They had this great idea of putting actually a target or whatever with the such a salute near the concentration camp. Of course, I didn't say that, and that is important. The host and the official salute was a long ceremony as it was for the Independence Day of Croatia. And so they put near a concentration camp, where the long ceremony was the official salute of those who were killing, a commemorative plate or target to people who used the same symbol in the war in the 90s. Of course, this was very controversial. Actually, it was removed a few weeks ago. It was moved just to another city near Jasenovac, which is still not really a solution. So the three commemorations are from the Croatian government, from the Jewish community, and from the anti-fascist and the Serbian community. Then we have another commemoration, the Bleiburg commemoration, and it's commemorate the way of the cross. Now, for you who do not know the story, at the end of the war, the Ustaša, their allies, their families, and so on, tried to surrender to the allies near the Austrian borders. The Allies refused them and took them back to the Yugoslavian forces. When the Tito's forces came, they just started to kill them without judgment, and tens of thousands of people were killed in a really ruthless revenge on their way from Austria to Yugoslavia. What is the problem with this commemoration? Of course, those who are commemorating the Ustaša and their families and everybody who were killed in this process usually like to use Ustaša symbols, and the Austrian authorities even thought about blocking this commemoration because of the symbols that are used there. Now, what is the sense of the government? Actually, it's state-sponsored, and a lot of representatives from the government are always there, and nobody ever said anything. Obviously, these two commemorations are opposite almost one to the other, and creates a lot of division in the society. And so, what did they do? They tried to organize some kind of board for the dealing with the past, that is made of historians, philosophers, lawyers, and so on, who should decide how we should deal with this problem. And it's actually funny because no one who is serious about this topic wanted to participate in this board, so it's really interesting how it's going to work out. The second aspect, the culture, I analyzed two figures. Dr. Hasanbegović, the former Minister of Culture. When he was younger, he was writing for a paper that was called NDH, like Independent State of Croatia. It was run by the nephew, Ivan He was writing for the Ustaša. Now we can see that he was young and he changed his mind. Before he became Prime Minister, Minister of Culture, he said that the Indahar was a national tragedy. And just after he was actually, well, he finished his role as Minister of Culture, he said that we should abolish all anti-fascist commemorations. So you can imagine if you have a Minister of Culture like this, what is the, let's say, the relationship towards the Indahar and its literature past and so on. On the other side, we have Seba, a filmmaker. He tries to make a documentary about the Seba concentration camp. He wanted to prove that the Seba was not a concentration camp. It was just a labor camp. But after 1945, it became a concentration camp where tens of thousands of Croatians were killed by the communists. Of course, he didn't have any source to prove that. When he was faced with the falsified documents that he used, he said that he got it from some piece from Belgium. Okay. So, what happened after that? He was awarded a prize for cultural achievement, and he was appointed as an advisor of the director of the university. So you can imagine a guy like this who actually got a prize for a false documentary in a concentration camp in Croatia. That's what is happening right now. And the third one is sport and entertainment. After a game, Josip Šimanić, a former footballer, between Croatia and Iceland, he took the microphone at the stadium and encouraged supporters to sing with him and saluting with a Dom Spremni salute. Of course, the response from the public was, they were really happy to actually respond to his, I'd call it provocation, but to him probably was not, but to his encouragement to salute with the, actually with the Ustaša salute. And then he was banned for 5 games. Now he's the assistant of the national team selector, which says a lot about the policy in this sector of the Croatian sport industry, we call it. And then we have Marko Petrović Thompson. He's actually a nationalistic rock star in Croatia. He was a volunteer of the Patriotic War. His concerts are full of symbols from the war, the big crosses and so on. The problem is he also uses the Ustaša symbols. One of his songs starts with the Ustaša symbol, Ustaša salute. He sang about songs about raising the concentration camps and so on. The Croatian president, when he was banned from playing in Slovenia, said that music is here to connect, so it was really bad to not listen to him. And so the conclusions, okay, you can see just a few pictures from his concerts, not the kind of concerts I like, but anyways. In the second picture, you can see the black flag of the host, the defensive forces. You can see the Dom Spremni salute. You can see the first white square, and so on. So this is the public who likes him. It's very popular. So the conclusion, why is the Indahar seen as something positive? According to some, because there's a feeling that the Indahar was just an unlucky try to get an independent state of Croatia after years and years and tens of years of actually Serbian hegemony to the kingdom of Serbia and of Yugoslavia and so on. And other reasons are actually stated by Orsten and Kutin. It's like the critical studies about the Indahar during the Yugoslavian period, which is true. For 45 years, it couldn't approach the problem from a scientific way. If we can say that Indahar had very good, and that's it. Political motives, of course, the Patriotic War brought back those Ustaša symbols, and if you want to gain political points, you gotta play on emotions, and politicians, they do this all the time. So this is another reason. And the third reason I didn't talk about it, but is the consequence of Serbian historiographical nationalism and revisionism. What does it mean? I mean, my colleagues from Serbia knows that very much, I guess. It means that the same thing is happening even in Serbia, so we have similar problems, but just the opposite. Thank you very much. I hope you can take it.
All right, thank you very much. And now the final paper is Uroš Čemalović. The role of membership of the European Union and of its legal system in the prevention of nationalistic discourse. Is this still the title?
Yes.
You're sticking to it. Good. Okay.
Let's hope it will work. It will. Good. So, first of all, thanks to the organizers for inviting me. I'm happy that this hall is getting more and more full of people, because it was half empty half an hour ago. So it must be because of our presentation. So. Okay, so you see, this is the topic. You heard a lot about the past and how past contaminates the present. And here I will try to explain how we can dig ourselves out from that past. So it's not going to be a negation of the interventions my colleagues gave, but it's going to be, in a way, a continuation of thought. Okay, this was for Hannah. absolutely nothing to do with my presentation. This was a campaign in 2004 in France. And for those who doesn't understand, I'm staying in Poland and you should come in big number. Yeah, plumber problem. So, nothing. This is more our case now. So, if we analyze our Southeast, West Balkans nations and the European Union, the relationship is a bit as presented in this drawing. So, I will start with a question for all of you. When was this cover page published? Please, feel free to react, please. Show some courage. Deborah? Fake news. Fake cover page. Absolutely fake. Yugoslavia never said big no to the European Union. So, okay, now the boring part. Plan of the presentation. I will first speak rapidly about the common political, legal, and cultural heritage of ex-Yugoslav countries. Then the influence of the EU in the prevention of nationalistic discourse. And finally, revival of the nationalism and the EU. How can we apply the lessons learned from the cases described by my predecessors? So, first, maybe you heard some of those elements from Tamara's intervention. I know that all of you are knowledgeable about the history, but ex-Yugoslavia was definitely not like other countries of the socialist bloc. There was a certain level of political and economic freedoms, but the constitutional system was weakened. There was a constant wish to have that balance West-East, and Yugoslavia was a member of the non-aligned movement. And Tito, as a leader of Yugoslav socialism, was one of the 3 leaders of that movement. But on the other hand, there were consecutive changes of the constitution that were weakening the federation. In 63, then in 74. I'll give you an example. Educational programs for elementary and high schools were put down to the level of republics and not the federation already in 63 and in 74 entirely. So it was the constant weakening of the federation. And as given that I'm a lawyer, I have to just focus your attention. My Czech colleague is not here, who is also a lawyer. She will speak tomorrow, I suppose. There was a significant federal legal heritage. For example, lower obligations, obligacioni zakon i zakon o obligacijama, was a very well done piece of legislation, to the extent that both in Croatia, Slovenia, and Serbia, now 90% of those rules are still active, applicable. And complementary economic systems of all ex-Yugoslav countries. Okay, I have another 10 minutes to show you some nice photos, and then to discuss about it. Yeah, Windows is saying something. Good. So, these are 3 houses in Bosnia. A house painted by Croat nationalists, by Bosniak Muslim nationalists, and by Serbian nationalists. And this is happening in the Republic of ex-Yugoslavia, which was the most Yugoslav. So my question is how that common identity failed against ethnic nationalism. How did we arrive there? And as we can see from here, I made 3 possible explanations, like you made 3 possible explanations. Shared political and economic development was there, but there was a constant complication, even under communism. And it was concomitant with construction of a common Yugoslav overarching identity, but at the same time, this process was something like under the carpet. Secondly, political elites of socialist Yugoslavia were corrupted, disinterested, incompetent, and permissive towards undergoing ethnification. And thirdly, and this is really a very strong connection with Diego's intervention, from early 80s, religious authorities of all three big confessions started to mess around, to influence the social and political life. So these are possible explanations. Now, to the EU. How can EU influence the prevention of nationalism and its discourse? First of all, the membership in the EU can have potentially calming effects. But I will try to argue that it is not always the case. There was a famous Thessaloniki Declaration of 2003, and if you read it, it insists so much on the words ethnic, ethnicity, ethnic, that it's already irritating and potentially dangerous. Second thing is the enlargement fatigue. So public discourse, both in the EU countries and in the potential future EU countries like Croatia, who joined in 2013, was oversaturated with negative effects of enlargement. Romania, Bulgaria. Many people would say that all the other potential member states will have a very difficult task after the countries that will not, some would say, fully prepared join the EU. That was a discourse. I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong. I'm speaking about the discourse. And then, secondly, various EU structures are absolutely and still are incapable to keep up that force d'attraction, that force of attraction in the eyes of candidate countries. Absolutely. So, what can we say about the legal system and how its harmonization can influence the, let's say, the discourse of nationalistic discourse? Especially for Bogdan, one very linguistic remark. We can say harmonization, approximation, or alignment of a legal system with another legal system. But here, I decided to choose the word approximation because, or alignment, because the third one, harmonization, really insists on harmony. You were disharmonic and now you're harmonious. While approximation is technical and clear. And alignment sounds like something fully obligatory, but in new law you have some acts that are not fully obligatory. You can choose the way in which you want to implement. Good. So, to the conclusion, I have, I suppose, 5 more minutes. How to apply lessons learned from ex-Yugoslav case. This is not going to be applicable only for the countries who are about to join, potentially EU, but also for the countries like Moldova, Georgia, and others who still don't have even the candidate yet, but have certain political will to join. My first conclusion here is that, many people will tell you, help them to get richer and the nationalism will disappear. Wrong. Economic development does not necessarily imply the reduction of nationalism. That's a fact. Then, there is a certain slowness of EU's enlargement-related procedures. They are very normatively influenced, they are gradual, and they can easily generate the feeling of unwanted partners, which can generate irritation and relapse. They don't want us. We are unwanted. And finally, my conclusion is that only effective and tangible, really, initiatives, not only policy initiatives, but legislative initiatives, who can have direct influence on everyday life of the citizens, can increase convergence and reduce impact of identity-based discourse. For example, projects such as Erasmus or Erasmus+. I had a small chat discussion with Diego yesterday, I told him in late 90s, my NGO, founded by a group of friends, and my modest person, made some people travel in the region, youngsters. This is the things that may influence the future, not really boring and lengthy procedures. And finally, facilitating communication. One of the best things that the EU did recently, I don't know if you would agree with me, is almost the suppression of roaming charges. It really influences you from the morning when you take your phone to the evening when you travel. So this could help create what Martin Kamke called space for transcultural existence. Because ex-Yugoslavia was a space of transcultural existence. Or maybe, and now I have to finish in a gray note, maybe not. This I have to explain to you. This is a photo taken in Hungary. This is a campaign in April before referendum. And on the left side, it's written, Stop Brussels Initiatives. On the right side, not more than 1 meter from the very same, is an EU project of renovation of a school, 953 million for it. It's about 3.5 million euros. So maybe all I've told you is questionable, but still my key argument is not only money, but initiatives that can make people live together. That's it. Thank you very much. I'm really eager to hear your questions and comments.
Well, thank you to all the speakers in this section, and now we're open for discussions. Please ask whatever questions you might have. Comments? Yes, please, Professor.
It was very interesting to combine these two aspects. My first question would concerning Croatian case is a very valid question. Did you compare the discourse on Croatian Independence Day with the discourse in Slovakia? Where the situation is very similar. There's a state underneath. It would be very interesting to have this. Second question to the same. Because I don't know exactly all this personalia. This Minister Hasanbegovic, when was he Minister of Culture? Was it before the entrance to EU or after?
After.
After. And what did EU say to this?
I think they had bigger problems. They didn't want to spend much time on Croatia.
I mean, we hear today so much about EU against Polish government and so. Was something like this in Croatian case?
Shall I answer now or call it? Okay, no, because that's why I didn't say anything about Slovakia, because I didn't know. Okay.
I have a question to both of you.
Okay.
It is something that I could remember my yesterday point of view. Reading this short quotation from this Thessaloniki declaration. Everywhere is civic, again this is what irritates me, ethnic against civic. If I would be a Serbian or a Croatian, and I would be called ethnic, I would be nationalist, I would become nationalist. Because it's offending. If I feel a member of a nation, of an old nation, with traditions and so on, and they call me ethnic, I would be very against EU at least. Doesn't it work in this nationalism also in your countries? I don't know. I only have the feeling, so no, that's all.
Thank you, George. Yes, please.
I have two questions. First, a short for Raul. What do you think, because you're really analytical, you analyze all the terms, what do you think about the term white nationalist? Because I really have a problem with that. It was connected to the Charlottesville protest, and they call themselves the white nationalists. And the second one is for Diego, but I don't know if anyone is familiar with Jeffrey Alexander's analysis of the Holocaust as the cultural narrative which transformed what was at the time a specific event, a war crime. Gradually, during the years, it became a universal symbol of human suffering and evil. So that made me think what happened in ex-Yugoslavia, what narratives were predominant. It's connected to your presentation. For example, I think in Serbia we didn't have the puppet state, but I think that the post-Second World War narrative was the narrative of victory, anti-fascist victory. And in a way it was good because it built up ex-Yugoslavia and it was something to be proud about, but in a way it hindered the fact that there was a large extent of collaborationism even in Belgrade, in Serbia, that we were not all anti-fascists, and that, in my belief, it contributed to the current relativization of collaborationism during the Second World War. So I think that it would be good to analyze the cultural narratives of the Second World War in Yugoslavia as well. So I just wanted to see if anyone has a comment on that.
Right, well, I thought you were going to comment, yes.
Do we start? You tell us when we answer.
No, we'll take some more comments. Yeah, we're asking questions and then we'll see if you have anything to say, yeah.
Okay, so the question that leads up with President Koch's question and draws on something that hasn't come up yet, but I think it's implicit also in some presentations. This question of ethnicization and the ethnic category as something negative is actually from the three of you. Wouldn't you think that there is a trace in this labeling, let's say, provisionally, a trace of what actually the post-colonial studies in the form of subaltern studies group argued in the 80s about this kind of category of good nationalism, good Western nationalism, and non-Western derivative or ethnic, etc. nationalism. Would you think that there are traces of that, or would you say that this ethnicization was indeed, as you said, because it's a very interesting concept, ethnicization is a process that led to conflict. Yeah? So I just want you to, answering Professor Koch's question, to think about whether we deal with this kind of categorization of nationalisms across West, non-West divide, which would give it a post-colonial, let's say, reflection, or whether it is quite a separate problem all the way, is it, right?
One more, and then we'll start.
Well, a quick thought on that. It's very much unrelated, really, but I'm thinking of the ethnic model of the United States, where to be ethnic is not negative. Nowadays, I mean, since the 90s, it has been an asset, actually, to be a hyphenated American, yeah? Even though some people have issues with that. So it can be a symbol of diversity, and in fact, in my understanding of the European project, there, as well, of course, there have been interruptions to it, but the idea was to promote ethnic diversity, and I know the case of Catalonia, for example, they're very pro-French, but anti-Spanish for historical reasons. So to promote cultural development of ethnic diversity in the way in which Catalonia does, so to promote their literature and English translations and all the rest, outside nation states. So there has been, ideally there should be a valorization of ethnic diversity in this cultural sense outside the nation state impositions. But I've got two real questions to Raul and to Uroš actually. So yeah, Raul, thank you very much for this. This is a very interesting theory. And I think you're arguing with a number of obsessions of the Romanian cultural space at the moment. Well, some of the Romanian myths about the past. So all this business of the Communist Party not really being a Communist Party, but maybe a fashion of the time, and what you were saying that they have a lot, they had a lot of legionary principles that were brought into the doctrine, and that would explain Ceausescu's policy. So maybe if you could expand on that a little bit, because I think there are a number of issues that need to be exemplified, because that's very anti-establishment, really. I mean, you're saying things that have not been necessarily part of the mainstream in Romania recently, and that's extremely interesting because it might answer some questions. And to Uroš, again, could you give an example of what one of these positive initiatives that the EU might have would be that would help people live together in this ethnic mess? Because I can see what you're saying about Yugoslavia. I mean, this ethnicization, again, Yugoslavia probably is a very good example of ethnicization going wrong, leading to ethnic conflict. But then isn't that very much precisely because of religion, which is an aspect you've mentioned? Because former Yugoslavia is very diverse from the point of view of religious cultures that have traditionally been in conflict. I mean, in the Balkans, Islam was associated with the Ottoman Empire, and there was a whole history of the Ottoman Empire being very oppressive in the region. So, of course, you can see a potential for conflict. So isn't that a problem? And what do you see as possible EU initiatives that could sort that out?
One question from Vyacheslav, and then we'll stop for answers.
It's a provocative question. I agree with you with what you said, especially at the end of your presentation. I don't know the Romanian context, but would you describe contemporary liberalism as democratic at all? And regardless of the answer to the first question, what makes it vulnerable to the populist challenge, in your view?
Okay, it's time to listen to you. Respond to all these comments and questions, everyone.
Who should start? Just you start from there, here.
Wherever, you go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for all the questions. I'll start with the last one before I didn't get to write it down, so I'm afraid I'm going to forget it if I begin at the beginning. Do I see contemporary liberalism as democratic? Yes, to the extent in which it is open to electoral competition, in which it tries to engage the public, but it's not. I mean, the anti-liberal projects, I see them as equally democratic. Put it this way: what is its vulnerability to populism? The fact it fails to deliver the prosperity it promises, I guess, to some extent. Until 2008, this was not so much of a problem. With the economic crisis, we witnessed what Hobsbawm was describing for the interwar period. You know, the crisis of liberalism, starting from financial economic crisis, but which translates into an exposure of how institutions are not really representative. The question, I mean, as Gramsci was arguing, is not so much of a clash between ideologies or between the left and right here, or between liberalism and its enemies. It's a question between, it's a clash based on representativeness, I think. And if you want me to give a short answer to this vulnerability of liberalism, is its lack of representativeness, if you want. Somebody was counting working class representatives in the French parliament from the 50s until now, and now the number is 1. It used to be in triple digits. So there we go. This is where politics has progressively become less and less responsive to these social classes which end up voting for right-wing populism, because they see, and I argue in the Romanian case, rightly so. I mean, this was one of the reasons why the fascist movement was popular. It was the only place where you could make it as a peasant to become a politician. It was the only way where you could be a low-skilled worker and become a politician. No other party would even consider you. So this openness was important. The question about national communism and fascism. I was expecting this. It's completely going against the canon of Romanian scholarship. I know it's a provocative statement, but I think I have the data to back it up. First, there is this common perception in Eastern Europe that sometimes the communists were former fascists. And this was especially true for the Arrow Cross legacy in Hungary. The Communist Party there took on a lot of people of the Arrow Cross. There's even a joke in Romania about this, saying that the tomato was first green and then red. Green being the color of the fascists, red, of course, the communists. In Romania, it's less true than anywhere else in Eastern Europe in terms of statistical terms, in terms of the number of people they took over and they co-opted as members of the Communist Party. That being said, while those members, the people themselves, were persecuted, if you look at the ideological tenets, you will find parallels in everything. I was mentioning in my presentation this plan for economic development and industrialization of the country, which was a fascist plan. You would think a truly communist party, or a communist party, would be bothered by using a fascist text to develop the country economically, to reindustrialize the country, as Ceausescu called it. If you think of culture, with Ceausescu you have this beginning of a notion of historicity of the nation, which goes back to the Dacians and the Romans and so on. This was not mainstream with anybody except the legionaries in the interwar period. And also this progressiveness of culminating in a golden age, which, I mean, if you visited the National History Museum in Bucharest during communism, you would start in the basement with the Roman ruins, and you would end on the final 5th floor in this glorious golden age with Ceausescu as the sort of culmination of Romania's national project. This was fundamentally a pattern that Codreanu established. This was a notion of continuity from the dawn of time until now, which the legionary movement put forth more forcefully than any other political formation in Romania. If you think of Cântarea României, the Romania song, which was this national song and artistic festival, let's say. It wasn't folklore, it was a mixed form of art. This was a fascist manifestation. I mean, if you take that, and if you take Nazi German, Italian fascist samples from the 30s, they look strikingly similar. Păunescu, Vadim Tudor, the people who put together this cultural program of Ceausescu in the 70s and 80s were people belonging to the radical right. And in the post-communist space, they were rightfully seen as being radical right. The return of anti-Semitism in its interwar form is associated with these people. These people spoke in published articles in the 80s in terms that were reminiscent of the legionary movement. So in many fields, from the economy to society to perceptions of history to culture, you can see this shadow of the legionary movement, which is of course never acknowledged, quite the opposite. It's always demonized. All the pop culture, all the communist pop culture produced under Ceausescu has as the main villain the legionary. All the movies, in all the movies, the bad guys are the fascists, who always wear these also long leather coats, which has no connection to historical reality. But if you ask Romanians who grew up during communism, how is a legionary? He's got this long leather coat. But why, we don't know. So it was a demonization of the people while appropriating their ideology. Ethnicization, very good. That's a very good question. And my personal short answer to this is beyond this. I mean, I don't buy the civic and ethnic distinction. Of course, one of the weird things I was mentioning in the presentation is the civic foundations of fascism. It's like I'm not the one who said it, but I urge you to have a look at this book by Dylan Riley, because it's a really interesting take on how voluntary associations don't have to be liberal. Voluntary associations can turn into an anti-liberal project, which can be nationalist, but anti-liberal. But going back to your East-West divide, my question back to you would be, what do you think is the impact of this valorization of ethnic diversity that the EU or the neoliberal project puts forth in enforcing ethnicization? This notion that minorities are important, that one's ethnic diversity is important, the notion of multiculturalism, if you will. I think this had a lot to do on a very benign agenda. I'm not saying this is a detrimental or negative agenda, but it had a lot to do with people rediscovering identities that were lost. And of course, part of it has to do with, I mean, I don't want to answer for the case of Yugoslavia. In the case of Yugoslavia, it's collapse of one composite identity which was no longer valid. And I think in Eastern Europe, in many cases, this was the case. You had to fill in the space with something. But I'm still interested in the supply of this multicultural model, of this valorization of ethnic diversity as a factor in explaining ethnicization. Not necessarily in negative terms, but along these lines. And of course, the post-colonial link you would know better than I do. Finally, the white nationalism question. Yeah, I think it's a misnomer. I think many of the terms used in the American radical right, what's alt-right? What's the validity of alt-right? And it's on the one hand, euphemisms meant to divert attention from the real. I mean, if you say white supremacist, it's quite clear. If you say white nationalism, maybe it's not so clear. On the other hand, it's sort of a Freudian slip, isn't it? Because it shows when they say nationalism, this is the kind of nationalism they mean. I mean, if we are to speak about nationalism in the US today, which I still think is a problematic term, this is the kind of nationalism they have in mind, of a white US cleaned out of ethnic minorities, cleaned out of, well, I mean, the people in Charlottesville were marching with Jews will not replace us, so even though Jews are white and there's the Judeo-Christian heritage established, Jews are apparently not white enough for these people. So I think on the one hand it's a misnomer, and on the other hand I think it's a Freudian slip, really showing what they see the national. But I think the word nationalism there is not appropriate. On the other hand, and this is the interesting part, I'm wondering how important is religion rather than nation or race in this context? Because this guy, Heimbach, is fascinated by the legionary movement because of its religion, and in an attempt to dissociate themselves from racism and from being seen as neo-Nazis, they turn to religion as a more benign form of identification, but still highly exclusive of Muslims, of Jews, of, it's potentially more exclusive than other categories, like nation in the US. Thanks.
Okay, so Diego?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. As for the comparison between Slovakia and Croatia, I'm not that much into Slovakian history so far, but what I know is that the leaders of the two puppet states, let's say, had a different background. Pavelić had a different background from Tis, as far as I know. So it's kind of, for me, hard from this starting point to compare them to a higher level, because, for example, the relationship between Pavelić and the Archbishop of Zagreb that I showed in the picture, there are many critics that say that the Archbishop was pro-fascist, let's say, independent state of Croatia and so on, but still, the relationship between him and Pavelić was really complicated. Actually, although Pavelić was a real Catholic Croatian, he actually went to the cathedral just 2 times in 4 years.
I just asked about the present.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
How it's made.
Okay, and then I know even less because I'm really not into the Slovakian contemporary, let's say, nationalism and stuff. As for the Minister of Culture, actually, what is interesting, he became minister in 2015, and he has a PhD in history, and his role, actually, in my opinion, is somehow the legitimation of the historical reality of the independent state of Croatia. For the radicals, having a prime minister who says stuff like that and who has a PhD in history means like he knows something. If he's saying that probably that's the truth. But he was prime minister just for less than 2 years, because then there was a lot of pressure from outside, so he had to be put away. Now he's the leader of the radical right-wing parties in Croatia. He's fighting to change the name of the streets and squares in the capital and so on. But I think his figure is interesting because of this, in my opinion. As for the question,
it's too complicated. I was thinking about the narratives. In a way that the progressive narrative of victory, anti-fascist victory, kind of moved away on the side the fact that there was a puppet state and there was a collaborationism in Serbia and other countries, and that kind of helped to the revisionism.
I think it's a crucial question, because for 45 years during Yugoslavia, you could not say that Croatia had this independent state. It was not Croatians. They were some kind of, I don't know, maybe aliens who were pretending to be Croats. You couldn't talk about that. After this historiographical lack, as I said, there was no scientific approach to this question. Things happened similar to what Raul said. We had this, the Ustaša became somehow martyrs of the Croatians. That's really similar to what he said. because for 45 years they were demons, and now they are martyrs. They are the good guys, and they were not understood, and so on. So I think this is a crucial question, because, and the result of this revival, let's say, of the Ustaša is because we pretended that they were not real for so many years, and people don't have any knowledge about what happened and how we developed this process and so on. So this is a crucial question, really, and maybe the main reason, probably because we have the political situation that we have. And the last question, Western Eastern nationalism. What I can say about, let's say, Croatia right now is that it's complicated to talk about nationalism in Croatia. The categories are really mixed. Either somehow you are left and then you are communist, or you are right and then you are a fascist. Nationalism doesn't have the meaning that it should have, neither patriotism have the meaning, because for the who are on the left, patriotism, it's equal to be fascist. Who is on the right, if you are left, you are a communist, and you probably, your father or your mother worked for the secret service of the communists. So this really, the categories do not exist actually how they should be. So the discourse is really complicated to make and to have any discussion actually at all about this nationalism, Western, Eastern, and so on. It's not really about Western and Eastern, it's about who we want to be, how we describe ourselves and our opinions and so on. So that would be it for me. Thank you.
Okay, so I will be extremely brief because I'm the only one standing between you and coffee break. So let's do it quickly. First question was from Miroslav. You are right. It can sound bad, ethnic, and the explanation partially responds also to the Dorota's question, but only partially. This very concrete Thessaloniki declaration was written by the team led by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, his colleague. The very same team that worked.
That's the phone in the corner, I think.
Spooky.
Yeah.
It's there, okay.
Coffee is ready.
It's an Ustaš calling.
Yeah, so let's really become serious. The very same team that worked on the unsuccessful treaty, constitutional treaty. So this document was first written in French, and then it was réconciliation ethnique et pas nationale. Because if you say réconciliation nationale, it has a completely different meaning in French. So it was translated from French to English, and they kept the word ethnique. And to Dorota, your question was, is it post-colonial reflection or a separate phenomenon? I would say both. Because would you ever use a word ethnic nationalism in such a declaration for French or Western? I think it's reserved for less developed tribal, Balkanic, Eastern, nasty, tribal people, you know. So partially that's it. And second reason is that bureaucratic, let's say, bureaucratic reflexes of the EU. In terms that they really don't enter into the issues of sophisticated differences between ethnic and civic nationalism. They take a document, they translate it, they adopt it, and very often you will find pieces of legislation of extreme importance in a completely different meaning in French, English, and German. So they don't enter in subtleties. They're really out of it. But I fully agree with you that there is a certain element of post-colonial reflexes in the entire way of the EU proceeds with at least our region of the Western Balkans. It's a fancy way, or politically correct way to say ex-Yugoslavia. Because if Diego wasn't such a normal person, a nationalist from Croatia would say, don't mention Yugoslavia. What's it? It's the region. The president of Croatia always speaks about the region. And so that's why we say Western Balkans. And then, Maria Sabina, your question, examples. You wanted examples. Cross-border initiatives. Like so many things that were done together by Hungarian and Croatian and Serbian peasants. Finance, very concrete local projects. My key point of my presentation was pouring money through instruments of pre-accession aid. And EU poured something like 2.3 billion euros only in Serbia in the last 14 years. It's not enough. It will not change the problem. What really is needed is that feeling of belonging, because average Serbian nationalist will tell you, we are Europe. They should come here, not us. We should not go there. We are already there. So that feeling of belonging should be developed, and how you do it, those initiatives, like peasants from Croatia meet peasants from Serbia, and then, hey, you have all the same problems with pigs, with floodings, and that's it. And the conferences like this organized in the region, Dorota, I don't know why I'm looking in your direction, but I think that this kind of conferences on nationalism should take place where the nationalism really takes place. And for now, this is...
Taking place here.
I would say
That's happening.
and not. Can I answer, because I was asked a question too?
Yeah.
I wanted to say, all those multicultural projects and opening up in various programs venues for, let's say, ethnic identities. I wouldn't judge those because I'm not able to. We would need to discuss each separate case. Definitely there is a case of recognition that has to be brought into the perspective because some identities were not only not recognized, they were also derided. Yeah?
Oh, so sorry.
Derided, etc. And you know more about it than I do. There is definitely a problem of the ethnic East-West line because it may feed into various tacitly nationalist programs, anti-EU programs, for example, in Poland today. So I think the problem of the differentiation between ethnic and national and potentially nationalist, but not necessarily, in this region, let's say East and Central Europe, is very important because it has not finished. It was very important in the interwar period. In Poland, for example, a country where you had 41% of minorities, these were national minorities, not ethnic, with some kind of ambivalence or ambiguity of Belarusian minorities, minority in terms of how they would perceive themselves as national or not. So it has not finished. It is really, the division exists and it's patronizing in a way, and it's so like Uroš said, yeah, it's kind of there is a post-colonial tint. But my impression is, and I think I would agree with Vyacheslav here, that if institutions, kind of get into identity policing, they have to be very careful, because if you think what multicultural models really worked out, and in what sense, but it would need another big session, many of them.
Okay. If there are no more questions, then perhaps we should stop here and give a hand to all the speakers in this session.